have 3 decision tables and look at them. And then, of course, you could make the assumption that the precondition of getting to the second decision table was that you had already handled everything on the first, because you had to click next and get past that first screen to get to the second screen. And similarly for the third screen, that would mean that the first and second screens were handled, and so those conditions and actions were out of the way, which I would expect would trim the size of the decision table quite a bit. So thank you for that, Mark. Let's see, other questions here. A comment from Alexander says, already written a number of years ago for BPM. It looked at use case in BPM as flow and decision tables as business rules. So I guess you're saying that the article's already been written. That may very well be true, but that doesn't preclude a new interpretation of it written by you, perhaps based on your experience of using it on a real project. And that, to my mind, is always great when you can have a article that's written on the application of some technique, which perhaps is already well described in theory, the application of that technique on real projects. So I, again, encourage you to think about writing such an article. It could be very useful. Let's see. Another question about where the slides are. Again, those are on the basic library, the resource page, rbcs-us.com, resources, and then basic library. Let's see. Comment here from 80. Thank you. I look forward to the other webinars. We're quite welcome. Look forward to seeing you there, and spread the word around to other people who you think might benefit from them. Happy to have a lot of people there, and of course a lot of good questions and discussion as we have had on this webinar. This has been certainly in my opinion, an excellent example of the use of this webinar technology and the Q&A aspects of it to really engage in a discussion rather than it being a one-way megaphone. So let's see, Mark, I assume that I answered your question about the use of decision tables for reports, and you know, if not, I mean, the short answer is yes. And then this appears to be a follow-on question. What would you exclude from the use of decision tables? Well, basically any situation where the things that have happened in the past are very heavily going to influence what's supposed to happen next, then you want to look at a state-based technique rather than a transactional type of technique like this one. And when we do the state-based webinar, if you catch that one, you'll see what I'm talking about there, the distinction that I'm trying to draw. And it is possible to try to use decision tables to model past sequences of events as conditions, but you know, once the number of states gets big, then you start getting get a very ugly decision table that way. So usually the technique itself will start to kind of tell you when you're using it for the wrong thing. If you see the conditions explode, the number of conditions explode, or thus the number of combinations of conditions starts to explode, it's usually a good idea to ask yourself, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Now, it might be that you need to apply the partitioning type of approach that Mark brought up, or it might be that you're trying to model states, and you know, that's something that's not working out real well. So I would say, you know, those are the things to exclude. You'll see how this works when we get to the state techniques here shortly on the subsequent webinar. Okay, we got a comment from Ratnadeep. Thanks, you are quite welcome. Again, hope to see you on future webinars, and feel free to spread the word about these if you think they're a good resource. Comment from Brian Heitzenberger. So thanks for tuning in, Brian. Thank you for this presentation. I bought your Managing the Pressing Process book a while ago. It's very well written. I'll apply a bunch of it to my organization. Good. I'm glad you found it well written, and I hope you continue to have success in using the ideas in it. Got a comment from, a question from Michael Ellis. Do you have any generic tips to avoid combinatorial explosions while performing equivalence partitioning? How would one know when enough is enough? I'll tell you what, Mike, let's hold that for the discussion on pairwise testing and domain analysis, and I promise I will do future webinars on those. Basically, the really short answer is that there are two possible situations. One is that you can analyze the way in which factors or variables interact, in which case you want to use a technique called domain analysis, which I discuss in my book, Pragmatic Software Testing. Or alternatively, the variables are not supposed to interact, but you're concerned that they might and thus cause a bug. And in that case, you use a pairwise technique like an all pairs test or an orthogonal array. And that's also described in Pragmatic Software Testing and in my book, Advanced Software Testing Volume 1. And I believe there are articles posted on the RBCS Basic Library that discuss both domain analysis and pairwise testing techniques if you would like to read them. So that's some resource for you. But this is a whole 90-minute webinar in and of itself, and we'll certainly cover that in the future. Comment from Mike. Or Mark, excuse me, you're welcome. Always enjoy these webinars of yours, and you did answer the question. Okay, good. Let's see, he says there is a useful tool that works on the same principle as tables, as pairwise. Okay, pairwise testing. Yeah, so we will, I promise, we'll do a future webinar on this concept of pairwise testing and orthogonal arrays and see how to use that technique for these combinatorial situations, and I think that'll be a real good and useful webinar as well. So stay tuned for that. And as I said, if you know other people who could get value from these, feel free to pass on the information about them so they can get subscribed. Okay, let's see. I got an email question here. Would you expect people to use this and other advanced techniques exactly as described here? Well, the examples are realistic, so certainly these are examples of practical applicability, but I also would say that it's true that learning how to use these advanced techniques is a lot like playing a musical instrument or a sport. And when you're learning to play a sport or a musical instrument, you learn fundamentals like how to use a racket or how to kick a ball or how to play scales and those sort of things. And you do these fundamentals over and over again. In a real game or a real concert, you use those same skills that you developed, but not exactly as you practice them, because the game or the concert unfolds as a combination of things that you know how to put together, but you necessarily practice all together. And I think that's the same here. You have to adapt techniques to the situation and master the blending of the techniques. Now, another question via email. Do these techniques mean that we don't need to use exploratory testing? Now, that's certainly not what I'm saying. We can always blend exploratory testing with tests that were developed using more structured techniques. And similarly, you can always, within an exploratory testing session, use these more formalized techniques to identify the particular test values that you're going to test. So these are not by any means exclusive. They're complementary types of techniques. And then one final email question. You talked about code coverage in a recent webinar. How do decision tables relate to code coverage? Well, kind of, sort of. I mean, you could say, okay, there's a relationship between compound condition coverage and decision tables because we're looking at compound conditions and actions to be taken, and yeah, that's kind of true. And similarly, conditions cause branches, so there's some branch coverage elements of this. Actions are implemented as statement blocks, so there's a statement block piece of this, but it's you certainly can't count on 100% code coverage in any of those metrics based on getting decision table coverage as described here. So I'd say be careful about the